Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next The Shadow of Kyoshi chapter analysis video. This one's going to be for chapter 6, which is called The Performance. So, obviously we ended the last chapter with a little bit of the preparation for the performance itself. We sort of continue that here with basically just before they're about to, leave for the meeting. So the performance that it's referring to here is that there's so much sort of pomp and circumstance around this meeting of this is the way it has to be done. There are rules and like decorum related to how you go about meeting the Fire Lord. So it's about the almost like dress code, basically, the way you should talk to him, the things you should and should not do. Basically, that's what this chapter is. That the other characters, mainly Rangi, warning Kyoshi about don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. And so you have an extraordinarily anxious Kyoshi, just like, this is not my area at all, yet I'm the Avatar and I'm expected to be like really good at this. And that's what we get into here. So we start off with just this idea of like Kyoshi just wears her normal outfit. They kind of explain that it's obviously got damaged in battle, but she has continued to sort of like replace it. They note that, tailors from Ba Sing Se had, basically tripped over themselves to help her out, because advertising is advertising. So that's why her her typical outfit still has the chainmail armor in it. It looks slightly different than it did before. She's got sort of, I suppose, better fabrics or different fabrics for it. And Rangi just sort of notes that, like, okay, this is fine for like the first time, because like I suppose because Jonzu gave it to her in the first place for like a kind of important meeting, it is actually decent formal attire. But Rangi says as we go forward over the course of this multi-day meeting, you should change it up a little bit. And Rangi just notes her sort of concern about why are you wearing the armor here as well, and it's heavier armor now, like it's more chainmail than it had before. And you get an interesting note from sort of Kyoshi's perspective here of that, she remembers the last time she let her guard down, and the last time she went out somewhere not being sort of wary of any threat. And that was a sunny afternoon in Zygan village, made brighter for having survived and scattered the Yellowneck menace. Her healed hands smelling faintly of herbal tincture, Kyoshi walking down the street side by side with Rangi and Lek. That's why she continues to basically everywhere she goes wear the armor, because she let her guard down initially after that, taking down Zu, and Lek died very shortly afterwards, and she wasn't ready to do anything. So she sort of blames herself for that, and that explains why she continues to wear the armor. Then after that, because she kind of reminds herself of Lek, she kind of thinks like, oh, how does Rangi feel about all that time we spent together? Like, she and I were part of the Flying Opera Company. I'm Dao Fei. How does she view that time? Has she completely forgotten about it and left it in the past, or does she view them as also being important to her? Like, has she just forgotten they existed? And, Rangi continues on and is like, okay, another rule: don't wear your makeup. Don't wear your white makeup and stuff like that. It's not the right thing to do here. Kyoshi's like about to protest, but I want to. And as we find out as the chapter goes on, Kyoshi mainly wants to wear the makeup so that it won't be overly obvious when her expression changes that much. As we see, she makes a few sort of expression mistakes over the coming chapters when dealing with these situations. The makeup sort of distracts people from subtle expression changes and makes her seem a little bit more just still and stoic. But Rangi actually surprises Kyoshi by saying, the paint is for pulling jobs with our sworn brothers and sisters, not for mingling among abiders and square folk who don't understand the code. And this sort of, complete Kyoshi's like absolute love for Rangi, that she gets and understands why Kyoshi is Dao Fei, and more or less considers herself kind of Dao Fei as well. They clarify here that, Rangi hadn't taken the oaths, but that her saying it like that, our sworn brothers and sisters, that she considers Kirima and Wong that close in the same way that Kyoshi does. So she understands the significance of it and that it's not for these people. So that's just another really nice thing. She kisses her on the forehead, and Rangi just notes that, okay, get it in while you can, because basically no public displays of affection in front of like everyone else in the Fire Nation, because it's not like the Earth Kingdom where most people will try to more or less ignore you. All eyes will be on you, so anything you do will be analyzed. Not the time to do any of this right now. So that's that interesting stuff. And so Kyoshi is just like, wow, so many rules, and she hasn't even got into the core of it just yet. Jinpa calls them in and is like, okay, it's time to go, and we see that he's wearing his traditional kind of robes, but they sort of note that he's wearing the sort of like Book 3 Aang robes, where like his shoulder and like part of his chest is kind of uncovered, and Rangi's just like, it should be fine, you're an air nomad, it's your cultural dress, it's not typical, but it should be okay. And so just, she's even a little bit critical of Jimpa's dress going in here, but that's just the Fire Nation having all these kind of specific rules and so on. So again, Kyoshi thinks she's going to a relatively small kind of reception with the Fire Lord and some of his closest, I suppose, allies. She's expecting 20-30 people, but she gets there, they basically cut to her on a platform being presented to everyone, and it's a gathering of like 500 plus people, and she's just like, you two are fired for not preparing me for this. So she's just been thrown into a situation she's absolutely not prepared for. It was fine if like with a group of like 20-30 people, it's much easier to make this stuff happen, but now she has to navigate the bigger kind of audience here, and it's just a huge problem. Yeah, they established that there's a musical band here sort of playing as, you know, Kyoshi and everyone else is introduced to everyone, because the reception is kind of for her to set up the meeting with the Fire Lord. So she can't quite make him out from here. She thinks she spots him from a distance away, but, you know, it's such a big room to hold 500 people. She does note that, like, Liu Beifong, there's like an Earth Kingdom delegation there, and Jinpa sort of criticizes himself for like, I'm sorry for not being able to warn you ahead of time that like a lot of Earth Kingdom people are here as well. I'll try to prevent them from coming to bug you with their kind of petty grievances that they always have. What else do I have here? And then, yeah, we pretty much from there set up the idea of, okay, the gathering has started. What does Kyoshi do next? Does she go straight to the Fire Lord or what? And they explain to her that, okay, here's how you do it. You have to mingle your way to the Fire Lord, and he'll mingle his way to you through the crowds. But you have to keep sort of the nobility sort of hierarchy in mind. You know, in the Fire Nation, the person of higher rank always introduces people of lower rank. So where does Kyoshi stand in that? Thankfully, it makes it a little bit easy in that Kyoshi, being the avatar, Rangi explains, is that you are actually able to introduce yourself to anyone, including the Fire Lord, because the avatar is such an esteemed position. But don't introduce yourself to too many people, otherwise it will look bad that you're introducing yourself to more people before the Fire Lord. And Kyoshi's just like, you know, why can't I just go straight to the Fire Lord then? And it's like, no, that's not how it works. So there's just so much of a performance out of just meeting the Fire Lord. That's what the chapter's about. You know, it's all about palace garden party etiquette and all this sort of stuff. You know, you can't go right to Lord Zoryu. That would be rude to the other guests. But she's also not meant to talk to too many of the guests, or that will be rude to the Fire Lord. It's all these conflicting pieces of information, and Kyoshi is just like panicking here. And thankfully, just her being the avatar and it being basically as respective of a position as the Fire Lord, you know, saves Kyoshi in this situation. Yeah, Jinpa quickly gets kind of talked to by a lot of the people there, because they're like, oh, Air Nomad, let's talk to him. They're all interested in talking to an Air Nomad, so he ends up not actually being able to save her from the Earth Kingdom people. They come pretty much, you know, straight over after a certain time. But before that, the main details that we get here are just some further Fire Nation thing. She gets a look at the full room here, noting the dress of the Fire Nation people, and specifically notes a lot of people wearing the specific symbol of the stone camellia. So this was obviously the flower that was on the portrait that we saw earlier on. That was she was not meant to talk about to anyone except the Fire Lord. And yet, this is the majority of people in the room. It says here a good quarter of the attendees were wearing some form of it, the largest group. What's going on here? And she thinks that, the Fire Lord must be the clan of the late Fire Lord. That's the main lineage of the Fire Lord clan. That must be it. Turns out not to be true, but that's revealed in a later chapter. That's just Kyoshi's thoughts on it for now. Then we get introduced to what are some of the foods that they're having here? It just says here, skewers of hippo ox, so there's an animal, hippo ox. Ocean kumquat, that was mentioned in the series, of course. Fish, they just are pretty generic there with it. But Rangi's kind of like, that's odd. There are no stock nose mushrooms. They're a traditional Festival of Zeto food. The mushrooms grow on overcrowded ears of grain, so they're symbolic of a good harvest. I don't see them anywhere. And Rangi's kind of like, this is actually quite a big deal, Kyoshi. I know you don't really care, but this means the harvest hasn't been that good this year, because if there were any of them, we'd have them here at the palace at such a banquet during the Festival of Zeto. If we don't have them, no one has them, meaning that things aren't as sort of prosperous at this time. And this is going to get into some of the issues the current Fire Lord is actually having, and kind of why Kyoshi is there in the first place. But this is when Liu Beifong comes over, and he just introduces himself. Of course, we know Kyoshi doesn't particularly like him. She views him as being just as responsible as Jianzhu for Yuan being treated the way he is. But he is a respected member of Earth Kingdom's sort of nobility, so she has to be okay with him. She asks about, his grandchildren, I think it is? Yeah, how are your grandchildren? And he just says, numerous and unpromising. And he goes through them and just explains how, none of them are good leaders. I wish my grandchildren were this, that, and the other, except what they actually are. He talks about, wishing one of them would be a good leader. He'd take a halfway decent earthbender at this point. The way things are going, the Beifong name threatens to slide into obscurity. That doesn't happen, of course, so obviously the likes of Lao, I suppose, are actually noted for being good businessmen and so on. And then with Toph, a good earthbender does enter their lineage eventually, so once again. Because Liu himself was revealed to be a strong earthbender in the first book, of course. Kyoshi is forced to sort of satiate him and just basically say, through gritted teeth, would that children were fit to their parents' needs. And he sort of agrees with that and is on terms with her. But then he introduces her to Governor Xing of the Gintong province. He's someone who does have a petty grievance with her. Obviously this is referring to a previous incident that happened with Kyoshi, one of the times she did try to help out with the Earth Kingdom stuff before agreeing to not do any of it anymore because it was so petty. He talks about the misinformation you sowed among my people during your last visit to my lands has damaged the workings of law and order. And she's kind of like, what's he talking about here? And is struggling to remember what's going on here. And so she goes through the details. Okay, Gintong province, it was close to Si Wong, a dusty scrubland that was relatively unproductive and difficult to grow crops on. And she's like, and this is a great moment because she absolutely rips into this guy for having such a petty grievance. And you kind of think oh, maybe she does have the stomach for this. She's talking really well, but she's being sort of rude. But she's okay with doing it because as it's revealed, they can't be overly shocked at what she says to them, because they're Earth Kingdom visitors to the Fire Nation. If they freak out in the presence of the Fire Lord, that will look bad on the entire Earth Kingdom, themselves and everyone else. So they kind of just have to accept this kind of verbal barrage from Kyoshi, but Liu actually ends up agreeing with Kyoshi's view on the topic. She says, Governor Shing, now I remember. You were buying land at distressed prices from peasants who couldn't till their fields because of Dao Fei raids, forcing them to later work for you as indentured laborers on the farms that used to be theirs. And it says here, the exactness of her terms surprised the older men. She wasn't supposed to say such unpleasant facts out loud in polite company. She was supposed to allude to them, dance around the matter, peck at it like a small feeding bird. Lu says, that's a tad different from the way you phrased it to me, Shing. You told me you were paying good money to keep your lands free of bandits. I took care of the Dao Fei in the area, Kyoshi said, and once I finished, I told the farmers that I considered ownership of the land reverted back to the state it was in before the Emerald Claws first set foot in Gintong. So that's a faction of Dao Fei there is the Emerald Claws. I undid the problem and its aftershocks both. And he's like, I had binding contracts on those lands. I purchased them legally. I have the documentation. And she's just like, ugh. He just won't leave it go. And she says, she notes here, like, if she was an avatar of old, skilled in diplomacy like Zeto and Yang Chen, she might have offered him something to sort of sate him for now, soothe his temper, but she doesn't. She's completely, this is where she goes full on sort of Dao Fei. She doesn't respect the leadership, so she says, well, Governor, if you value business terms so much, I can send you a bill for pacifying your province. Given the results, my cost will be the equivalent of supplies and wages for a medium-sized army. I need payment immediately in a lump sum. And what makes it all the more funny is that Kyoshi notes what Rangi's reaction to this. And Kyoshi heard a nose snort of Rangi trying to desperately not to laugh. So Rangi is like laughing at Kyoshi, just ripping this Earth Kingdom governor apart here. And the governor is upset at this and snaps back at Kyoshi. These are the tactics of an urban racketeer. When they said you were a criminal, I didn't believe the rumors at first, but clearly, and Lu shuts him down at this point. Mind who you speak to, the Avatar, we're not in our homeland. So he shuts him down and then leaves basically at this point. So the chapter ends with Rangi coming over and is like, as much as I love watching you verbally set people on fire, be a little bit more careful. The same conversation between two fire nationals could have ended with an Agni Kai. This isn't a game, this is a garden party, there are stakes, which feels like a comedy line, but this is how serious the Fire Nation take these sort of issues and things happening. And Kyoshi's like, okay, I'll do better next time. Rangi says, good, because my mother's coming. And so that's the setup for the next chapter, is that Kyoshi is going to have to meet up with Heiran, who we know from before wants to talk to Kyoshi about something. So her first, proper, dealing with the Fire Nation people here at the garden party is going to be Heiran, and we'll see what happens. Does Heiran know about their relationship and so on? Let's see how this goes. So awkwardness because, girlfriend's mom, but just Heiran's also high-ranking in the Fire Nation as well. How does she address Heiran at the party, given that she already knows her to a degree? What's going to happen here? So there's the chapter. Not the most amazing chapter here. It's more of a chapter to present just this is how picky the Fire Nation is about these parties and them all going right. And it's all about the details of the dress that they wear. Kyoshi can't be her usual sort of Dao Fei self. She has to go by all the typical rules of these parties, despite how awkward she feels going into these things. The conversation with Lu is just to get across, even high-ups in the Earth Kingdom don't have the same authority here. It's Fire Nation protocol here, and the setup for Heiran. That's what the chapter's about. So solid, but not the best chapter. But it ends up being good setup for what happens in the coming few chapters that do properly get us into the actual plot, because we're very close at this point to meeting the Fire Lord and finding out what the problem that Kyoshi's here about actually is. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this chapter, but that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.